Now, we talk about the struggling economy in this country all the time. The more than 46 million people that are now living below the poverty line. The official 9.1% unemployment, and the real U6 measured 16.2% unemployment. The fact that large corporations continue to sit on piles of cash, hide in offshore tax havens, and take jobs elsewhere, while their executives rake in record profits. Altogether, you could call this not only a bad economy, but it's an employment crisis. But there's one thing about it that never gets talked about, and that's the underground economy that's rising because of the crisis that we're in. It's not only what you think in terms of prostitution or selling drugs. This includes things like babysitting, braiding hair, doing laundry, just off the record. And it's been estimated that this underground economy is worth somewhere around $1 trillion, or 8% of GDP. That means lost revenue for the government. But there are misconceptions out there about whether people are forced into or choose to be in the shadows, and as to whether this underground economy hurts or helps. So joining me to discuss it is Sarah Jaffe, an associate editor at Alternet. Sarah, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And first of all, tell me if there are some other examples here. As I mentioned, hair braiding, doing laundry, babysitting. What else counts as being part of the underground economy?
Sure. There's a lot of things, from your typical babysitting, selling things on eBay, your neighborhood guy who offers to help you move or mow your lawn for $50. Anything basically that you do that you don't report to the IRS or isn't regulated by labor law counts as the underground economy, or the informal economy, as some people say.
All right, but that's something that you could say has been going on forever, right? Americans have been having yard sales, asking their neighbors to help them out. What do we have to show us that it's really getting worse now post-financial crash?
I mean, it has been around everywhere, and it's really hard to say that with any certainty that it has been getting worse, other than the fact that the employment numbers keep getting worse, that more people are dropping out of the job hunt, and so whatever you can't trace it because it's not counted by any government agency, but you can assume that people who study this are assuming that it's going up. So.
All right, and then do we have any idea in that case from the people that are studying it, that are saying that it's only increasingly growing, how much revenue that means is being lost when it comes to taxes that would have been paid?
There's hundreds of billions of dollars probably, but it's not, it still probably doesn't compare to the amount of money that is being held offshore by massive corporations. I think that's I think the missing tax revenue really isn't the point here. I think that the point is that people are unemployed and are finding any way they possibly can to make a living, to feed their kids, to feed themselves, to keep from losing their homes while they're struggling.
Well, you mentioned, of course, the money that corporations keep in offshore tax havens. And, that's something you have to examine here, too, because we've done a lot of stories on this show where you see the government, it could be state governments, going after people that might be trying to sell a type of milk, but it's not FDA approved. At the same time, you have companies like Whole Foods going after people that might want to just grow their own produce, and have their own garden in their backyard. And do you think that some of the priorities are mixed up here, that we should, instead of going after people with these type of small operations, they should be going more after corporations?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. I don't think that there's any question to that.
All right, well, let's go back to talking about the underground economy then. How much of that, too, factors in the huge, huge labor force, about 15 million people that are undocumented immigrants here in the U.S.?
It's definitely an impact. It's definitely part of that. You have a lot of people who are coming in undocumented, who are working under the table, who are being exploited because they have no legal recourse because it's underground work. And that happens to people who are legal residents of the U.S. as well. If you don't have protections under the Labor Department, if you're not your employer's not reporting your employment, you have no recourse at all. You're basically stuck with whatever they want to pay you, however they want to treat you. Again, it's people winding up in these situations because they're desperate and there's very little protection.
So then how do you go about changing the dialogue? You know, because of course, so many of the arguments that we'll hear, if you talk about undocumented labor, people will say, well, they came here illegally and they chose to be in this situation because they don't want to go through the proper routes to get their paperwork. Or, you know, they might say that somebody else is, well, they're too lazy to apply for any real jobs and have to be responsible. And how do you change that and get people to realize that you don't choose to be in this type of situation where you're not part of the formal economic structure that goes on?
I mean, I think, first of all, it's important to make the point that it's not just undocumented workers, that it's all sorts of people. And second, I mean, we can argue immigration policy for hours and hours and hours, but what you really want to highlight about this, I think, is that people are doing this because there are no formal options for them. You know, when unemployment, like you mentioned at the beginning, is real unemployment is 16%, what are you supposed to do if you cannot find a job? You have to, and your unemployment benefits run out. The maximum is 99 weeks. We have millions of people who have exhausted that. It's not about people coming into the U.S. and taking our jobs. It's about people who can't find work and there are any sort of legal means that would pay them enough to actually survive. And I mean, that people should be aware is a crisis right now. I don't think that that's a secret to most people in this country.
Yeah, well, I think it's not a secret to anyone in this country except for maybe, I guess, Washington or some of the people on Wall Street. You know, we saw lawmaker John Fleming yesterday complaining about the fact that he only brings home $400,000 every year. And so that's where you see the real disconnect take place. You know, and in the meantime, as you wrote about here, this underground economy is only starting to grow. Sarah, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Great, thanks for having me.